I'd like to take a moment to share with you a solid conversation that I had with a new client. It's my hope that what I shared with her is a help to you the way it was to her. She is 42 years old. She's been married 9 years. Her and her husband have one daughter. And her husband, who is 48, she says has cheated on her multiple times. She said she recently found out through the last affair, she mentioned that he had about 4 affairs that she knew of, that through the last affair, that this affair produced a baby. The baby, and when she found out, is 6 months old, or was 6 months old when she found out. And she found out because the woman, apparently she and her husband had some type of argument or ordeal, and the woman showed up at her job and was not showing up in a hostile way, but came to her and told her everything and provided receipts that made it clear as day. She was obviously crying on the call, very upset. And she said, "Doc, you probably think I'm crazy for crying because he's cheated 4 times, but that doesn't make it easier." I said, "Ma'am, I wouldn't criticize you for showing emotion in a situation like this. I understand. And I do appreciate you acknowledging the fact that you have seen many times his behavior, but that still doesn't make it easier. And I understand that." She says, "Well, I'm really at a place where, Doc, I am struggling on knowing what to do next, if that even makes sense to you." I said, "Explain." She said, "Well, I finally told my husband when I found out about a month ago about this situation. I told him I was going to talk to an attorney and that I was going to be moving out." She said she did not want to be in the house. She didn't want any parts of that house or that space anymore, that she was going to go on. And she said he lost it. I said, "What do you mean by lost it?" She said, "Well, you just started going off. You're breaking up the family, things like that." She said, "Doc, I've been following you for about 2 years now." And I counted immediately and said, "No, you're breaking up the family. I'm just responding to your behavior." I said, "Good for you." She said, "But that didn't stop him. He was just going off and going nuts. You're breaking up this, you're breaking up that, you're doing this. That's why." And she said, "Doc, it's just made it harder. But, I went to go talk to an attorney. I've been looking at places, things like that. And when I did that, I told him one day," she said she went to see an attorney the next day. She said by that weekend, she was going to look at places. She said, he said to her, "Well, I'm going to just go away on a trip and take a couple of days and clear my head. And you're welcome to come." She said, "I thought it was odd that he would invite me." I said, "What did you do?" She said, "Well, I went on a trip. We just went to a place here in the States, and they're from America. I went to a place here in the States, and I said, 'How did the trip go?' She said, 'Well, it was a great trip. They got along pretty well.' She said there was no sexual involvement, but it was a great trip, and they got along really well. They didn't do a lot of talking like she hoped, but it was just her attending the trip and just being in each other's presence." She said, "Well, Doc, where it gets sticky is then the next week he invited me to a trip to Dubai." I said, "Did you go?" She said, "I did. I went. We went for a week. We had a babysitter. And on this trip, I attempted to try to talk with him, and he really didn't want to have a conversation about the state of the affairs or the baby or any of those things. But, we were in Dubai. We had a great time." She said we were even sexually involved. And it was a great trip. I said, "Then what else happened?" She said, "Well, I was also invited to another trip to London." I said, "For real?" She said, "Yeah. And I want to go on this trip, but as fate would have it, I needed to let him know about that trip coming up soon." This was as of the time we had the call. And she said, "Doc, I have a few more days before I need to let him go." And I said to him this time, "Let me just think it over." I said, "Why did you say that?" She said, "Because I'm not quite sure it's a great idea." I said, "Ma'am, alignment matters. What you say, what you do, and what you believe has to be on the same page. And if what you say, what you do, and what you believe is not on the same page, then you're going to say one thing, you're going to believe one thing, and you're going to what?" She said, "I'm going to do something else." I said, "Ma'am, have you ever been fishing?" She said, "Maybe once or twice as a little girl." I said, "Did you go with someone that was an expert?" She said, "I'm not quite sure. It was a friend of mine. He and I were trying it. He didn't really seem like he knew what he was doing. I didn't either." I said, "Perfect." I said, "If you have ever gone fishing with an expert, they'll tell you that when you go fishing, before you reel that fish in, you need to make sure that the hook is where? She said, in the mouth of the fish. I said, why? She said, because if it's not all the way in the mouth of the fish is going to get away. I said, ma'am, a trip is not going to change your marriage. Ownership and accountability is going to change your marriage. I said, you're not going to get him to be able to bite down on that hook till he wants to own the fact that he wants to come and do what is necessary to save his marriage. I said, but ma'am, understand this. If the hook is not in the mouth of the fish and you start reeling, trying to reel that fish in, what's going to happen to the fish? She started crying. I gave her a moment. I said, this is making sense, isn't it? She said, I think I know where you're going. I said, what's going to happen to the fish if you try to reel it in? She said, the fish is going to get away. I said, ma'am, going on a trip is not going to get him on the hook. And let me tell you some other things that ain't going to get him on the hook. Sex ain't going to get him on the hook. Going on these trips ain't going to get him on the hook. She mentioned earlier that he bought her a Chanel bag. I said, ma'am, a Chanel bag ain't going to get him on the hook. The only thing that's going to get him on the hook to absolving the challenges in this relationship is accountability and responsibility. And until he functions with that, all you're going to end up doing is being soaked and wet, but with no fish. She said, what do you mean? I said, ma'am, imagine you're on a boat going fishing and you try to reel in a fish and that fish gets off the line. How would you look jumping in the water going after that fish? She said, probably pretty crazy. I said, there are YouTube videos where people have wanted a fish so bad that when it got away, they tried to go after it and it ended up falling out of the boat. I said, but there's two reasons why that really looks crazy. I said, number one, it looks crazy because you might be deep bass fishing and there might be sharks out there. And so because you have pursued this fish that doesn't want to come to you so bad, you end up doing what? She said, putting my life in danger. I said, why? She said, going after something that's trying to swim away from me. I said, ma'am, that's what you look like. Going to Dubai, having sex with a man who won't even talk to you about the challenges in your marriage on his part. Oh, and by the way, got a baby on the way that he refuses to even discuss with you. You're going to end up soaking wet. I said, so it looks crazy because number one, you're putting your life in danger. I said, number two, it looks even crazier because guess what else is in that ocean with those other fish? She looked stumbled. I said, ma'am, other fish. If you heal, then you're not going to jump in an ocean going after one fish that doesn't want to heal because you realize that the same place you found him, if you look around, there's a whole lot more. She's boohooing, crying at this point. I gave her a moment. I said, ma'am, you've got to figure out what's more important to you. And at the end of the day, a lot of people do these things for a lot of different reasons. I said, but what we need to do is think about doing something differently. She said, I understand that. And Doc, I've really been trying to do it. And I've been telling him he needs to hurry up and get his act together, or I'm going to leave. He needs to hurry up and get his act together, or I'm going to just do this. I'm going to do this. I said, ma'am, have you ever had a car repossessed? She said, I haven't, but I got a cousin that has. I said, perfect. I said, if you ask your cousin that had a car repossessed, ask your cousin if the repo people called her before they came. She stopped crying and started laughing. I said, they didn't call, did they? She said, no, sir. I said, why? She said, because the repo man never announces when he's coming. I said, man, why don't you stop announcing? Why don't you stop announcing what you're going to do and start making moves necessary to clean up your own life and your healing so you can make clear-minded decisions? I said, the repo man never gives a hint, but the repo man always has a plan. And here are 3 things you can do differently. I said, number one, relax the line. She said, what do you mean? I said, go back to the fishing analogy. That if a good fisherman is out there fishing and they feel a tug on that string, they're not going to jerk that string. They're not going to jerk the string. They're going to be patient and they're going to give that fish time to bite down on that hook, thinking they just have a worm, and to get deeper and deeper on that hook. And they're going to take their time. And when that fish has really grabbed it, yes, that fish is going to go a little crazy for a little bit, but that hook is going to be so deep into the fish's mouth that you'll be able to pull it, and there may be some resistance, but you know that fish is not going to get off the hook. I said, ma'am, you got to relax. I can't tell you what to do as a married woman, but going to Dubai and going on all of these trips and getting Chanel bags is not relaxing the line. It's forcing the line. I said, that leads me to number 2. I said, another thing that you can do is really be honest about your fear and letting go. said, most people in this situation, when it comes to divorce, there are 3 reasons why people tend to struggle with whether or not to do it. Right at the top of that list is fear, next to things regarding your children, and obviously things that are financial or maybe external in that regard. I said, but fear is a big part of this. And the reality of the matter is you're going on these trips because subconsciously you're holding on to a hope that he will what? She said, change. She said, Doc, you're spot on. I'm holding on to a hope that maybe this can work. I said, no, yes, you're holding on to a hope. I said, but he's making it worse because he's using things to keep you on the line. At the end of the day, ma'am, there ain't no hope in Dubai if there's no accountability and responsibility. There ain't no hope in sex if there's no accountability, no responsibility. There is no hope in a Chanel bag if there's no accountability or responsibility. I said, ma'am, a large part of this is fear. I said, and until you fix your fear, you will have no faith. If you have no faith in yourself and how you can bounce back, you won't trust yourself. If you don't trust yourself, you will not be able to let go. I said, and finally, ma'am, the third thing you got to do to get out of this is you got to set a boundary. One of the beautiful things about her feminine energy was that it was hopeful. And I explained to her that feminine energy is very hopeful. It's what makes feminine women and women in general, for the most part, incredible mothers, because of this hope, this willingness to always believe and never give up until they do decide to believe and give up, or until they do decide to give up. But until then, what makes a woman so beautiful and special is that she will try to hold on to something that she really loves and believes in. I said, but ma'am, you got to set a boundary. And I'm not telling you not to go to Dubai. I'm not telling you not to go on these trips. I'm not telling you to do those things, but I am telling you, you better have some boundaries. What sense does it make to go on a trip like that without accountability? I said it would be different if he says to you, yep, let's go on this trip. We're going to take a couple of days to get away from reality. I want to take a couple of days and we just put everything on the table. I want to lay all the cards on the table. I want to go to counseling. I want to go to therapy. I want to do whatever it takes. And this trip could possibly reset us. I said, then ma'am, pack your bags. Pack your bags and go. I said, but even if you go, you shouldn't be there and probably should reconsider sleeping with him. I said, because if you don't set that boundary, sleeping with him does what? She says, Doc, it makes me feel like he's on the hook. I said, exactly. I said, set this boundary. And the boundary in this situation can look like something as simple as a timeline. I said, ask yourself, how much longer do you want to wait on his behavior to change? And set a mental deadline. I'll give him until October for things to change, and set that mental deadline. And I said to her, I said, set it in the back of your head. And when that deadline comes, if things have not changed, then you got to hold yourself accountable so that what you say, what you do, and what you believe, agree. And that's what gets you off the hook here. I said, and just like the repo man does not say when he's coming, you don't set the deadline and say, hey, man, I'm giving you until October to change or I'm leaving. No. Cut that out. Stop with the threats. Keep the boundary, the deadline right in the back of your head. I said, and ma'am, this helps you get further down the line when it comes to progress and wanting to live the hill life that you want to live. I said, but ma'am, he's not on the hook yet. And you doing all of these things, it's just causing him to tap on that hook. He can feel the hooks coming in. He's letting that hook go and he's swimming back in the water. She was really gracious. We're working through her values. The value system, she downloaded that. She has the 5 areas of healing book, and she's making progress. And I believe either way, she's going to be fine. I hope this story made sense. If it did, type church in the comments with 3 R's. And then remember, you've got 2 jobs. 1, be better today than what you were yesterday. And 2, don't forget what I told you. What's up, everybody? This is Dr. Zeb. Listen, I've been dying to make this announcement for a very long time now, and I'm pleased to say that Inspire Nation has officially launched. Yes, we finally got a Facebook and YouTube community group where we're going to have exclusive content, exclusive shorts, exclusive discussion prompts, where we're going to engage with other people literally around the world who are on the same healing journey that we're on. I need you to go find these pages right now on Facebook and YouTube. Inspire Nation, follow the page, join the group, introduce yourself, and be prepared to link up with literally thousands of people around the world who are on the same healing journey, who are looking for the same resources, and who want to also be surrounded with other like-minded individuals who are growing in the same direction as you are. I'm so excited about this because it's the beginning of some great things I can't talk about right now. Listen, you got 2 jobs. 1, be better today than what you were yesterday. And 2, don't forget what I told you.